The quiet boy from Chennai. The night was supposed to be perfect. Everything had been planned for months. Flowers lined the stage in bright colors. Lights danced across the hall like stars fallen to earth, and a soft hum of anticipation filled the air. The auditorium, usually reserved for dignitaries and business tycoons, buzzed with the arrival of global leaders and innovators. At the heart of it all was one man, Sundar Pichai. He had returned to India not just as the CEO of one of the world's most powerful tech companies, but as a symbol of possibility. For the people of Chennai, his journey from modest beginnings to international influence was more than inspiring. It was deeply personal. But as cameras flashed and guests took their seats, something quiet and small happened just outside the grand entrance. A woman in a simple cream-colored saree stood still as two suited guards blocked her way. She held a small clutch, hands trembling slightly, not out of fear but from confusion. She had no official pass, no printed invitation. Her name wasn't on the guest list. The guards, doing what they were told, turned her away. "This is a VIP event, ma'am," one of them said, avoiding her eyes. "Please wait outside. This area is restricted." She didn't argue. She simply nodded and took a step back. Her eyes, however, stayed fixed on the building's entrance. She had seen her son's name on every poster. His face smiled back at her from every banner. And yet in this moment she felt like a stranger, unnoticed, invisible. 500 feet away, inside the venue, Sundar checked his watch again. His speech was minutes away, but his eyes kept scanning the back rows. He had specifically asked for her seat to be placed there, away from the spotlight, just how she liked it. She never wanted attention, never wanted praise. But tonight he wanted her to feel proud. He wanted her to see what her quiet sacrifices had built. He remembered her walking him to school every day when he was a boy, even in the heaviest monsoon rains. He remembered how she saved rupees in a tin under the stove, whispering to herself that one day her son would fly on planes, sit in rooms filled with decision-makers. She never told anyone about the nights she skipped dinner so he could have enough. Never complained when his shoes wore out and they couldn't afford new ones. She always smiled and said, "We'll figure it out." The applause started. The host stepped up to the microphone, welcoming everyone. But Sundar's heart sank a little. She wasn't in her seat. He stepped outside. Security hesitated, surprised, to see the guest of honor moving alone. He ignored them. He walked past the red ropes, scanning the crowd gathered near the barricades. Then he saw her. She was sitting on a low wall, her saree slightly dusted with the dirt from the garden nearby. She didn't look angry, only quietly unsure, like a mother who didn't want to make a fuss. Sundar didn't say a word. He walked to her and held her hand. "Why are you here?" he asked softly. "They said I don't belong," she said, almost apologetically. "No pass." For a moment, Sundar stood still. Not as a CEO, not as a global leader, but as a son. Then without warning, he turned around and walked with her toward the entrance. The guards stiffened. He didn't shout. He didn't scold. He simply looked at them and said, "She's not just a guest. She's the reason I'm here." The hallway grew quiet. People paused mid-conversation. All eyes followed as he guided her to the center aisle. The seats at the front were already full. He didn't care. He led her to the stage. "You'll sit here," he whispered. "This is for the speakers," she said, unsure. "You spoke the loudest when no one listened. This seat is yours." The crowd, still unsure of what was happening, watched as Sundar walked to the microphone. There was a pause. Then he began. "Before I start," he said, his voice steady, "I need to introduce the most important person in this room." The room grew still. "She's not on your lists. She doesn't have a title, but she gave me everything. Time, strength, and the kind of love that never asks for anything in return." Gasps rippled through the audience. Some turned to look at the woman now seated near the edge of the stage, her eyes lowered, her hands clutched in her lap. They said she didn't belong here tonight. But if she doesn't belong, then neither do I. The silence that followed was deeper than any applause. Outside the venue, news vans scrambled to adjust their coverage. Inside, phones quietly filmed the moment that would soon flood the internet. But as Sundar looked at his mother, he didn't care about the cameras. He only saw the woman who once patched his school uniform with the threads of her own blouse. The woman who walked miles to get him textbooks from second-hand shops. The woman who never let him see how tired she was so he would keep dreaming. But the night had just begun, because someone else in the audience had watched everything. And they weren't clapping, they were making a call. And what they said next would change everything. A chair no one expected, the applause eventually came. Soft at first, then growing into something louder, almost uneasy, like people were trying to catch up with the moment they had just witnessed. The cameras that had been focused on Sundar now shifted slowly to the elderly woman seated at the edge of the stage. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. Her hands stayed folded on her lap, eyes focused only on her son, as if all the world had fallen away and there was nothing but that single moment between them. To the crowd, this was a powerful gesture. A man who led one of the world's most influential tech empires had just paused an international summit to honor his mother. Not with words alone, but with action. To Sundar, it wasn't a gesture. It wasn't planned. It was instinct. He still remembered the smell of the kitchen when he returned home from school as a boy. The scent of tamarind and rice filling the small space they called home. His mother would hum as she stirred pots on the old gas stove, while the overhead fan spun with a slow, tired rhythm above them. She never asked him how his day was. She would always ask instead, "What did you learn?" And when he said, something clever, something curious, her eyes would shine like he'd won a prize. The weight of those memories stayed with him now as he looked out into the sea of suits and polished shoes. He wasn't supposed to speak yet. The event was tightly timed. Protocols, speeches, press releases, all choreographed to the second. But now, none of it mattered. "Before I continue," Sundar said, holding the microphone gently, "I need to ask for your patience." The audience, though unsure, remained silent. No one dared interrupt. In a crowd that large, silence isn't empty, it's full of questions. Sundar turned to his mother. "Amma," he said quietly, "do you remember that morning I got the phone call?" Her eyes lifted to meet his. She nodded, the corners of her lips pulled into the faintest smile. "She was the first one to know," he said to the audience. "The day Google offered me a job, I didn't tell anyone at first. I told her. Not because I was sure, but because I was scared." People began leaning forward in their chairs. The media teams, at first unsure if this deviation would ruin the tight schedule, now held their cameras steady. The story unfolding was not one they could script. "I was scared because I didn't think I was enough," Sundar continued. "Even with degrees, interviews, and offers, I still felt like that skinny boy from Chennai who once shared textbooks with 3 classmates." A few soft chuckles floated from the crowd, but mostly people remained still. Something deeper was unfolding. My mother didn't say congratulations. She didn't even say I'm proud of you. She just said one sentence that I'll never forget. She said, "Be gentle, even when the world is not." He paused again, letting the silence do the heavy lifting. But in the far right corner of the auditorium, behind the cameras, behind the last row of seats, someone else stood quietly. A man in a dark blue blazer, a Bluetooth earpiece pressed against his temple. He wasn't clapping. He wasn't smiling. He was speaking into his microphone. "We have a problem," he whispered. "Security flagged the woman. She's not on the list. This changes everything." His name was Aaron. He wasn't just part of the event's coordination team. He was one of the executives from a powerful local sponsor. For weeks, his company had partnered with global firms to ensure the event ran smoothly. He had built this stage. He had selected the list. And in his mind, people who weren't on that list didn't belong. "Pull her out quietly," he muttered. "Get her back to the private section before this goes further." But as he spoke, something unexpected happened. A young girl, no older than 16, stood up from the middle rows. She wore a school uniform, her backpack still slung over one shoulder. She had somehow made her way into the event. No one knew how. Perhaps someone had invited her as part of a local student program. She held a small notebook in one hand and looked directly at Sundar. "Sir," she said, her voice shaking, "may I say something?" The hall froze. No one expected her to speak, certainly not in front of CEOs, tech giants, and world leaders. Sundar turned to her gently. "Yes," he said. She took a deep breath. "I lost my father last year. He was a bus conductor. We didn't have much. But every night before he slept, he would read to me. He always said, if Sundar Pichai could make it from a 2-room flat in Chennai to Silicon Valley, then so can you." Her voice broke slightly. Someone handed her a tissue, but she didn't take it. "He believed in you," she whispered. "And because he did, I started believing in myself." The room was no longer just listening. It was holding its breath. Sundar walked down the steps of the stage. Slowly, quietly, he reached the girl and placed a hand on her shoulder. "What's your name?" he asked. "Kirthi," she said. He turned, back to the crowd. "This," he said, his voice stronger now, "is why I came back." He wasn't talking about the keynote, or the awards, or the headlines waiting to be printed. He was talking about something deeper, about the invisible lines that divide stages from sidewalks, velvet ropes from worn sandals, and belief from doubt. A wave of emotion washed over the room. People began standing, not to leave, but to acknowledge what they were feeling. Some wiped their eyes, others clutched their phones, unsure if they were watching history or something even more personal, something they'd remember long after the cameras turned off. But not everyone was moved. Aaron, the executive in the back, was already dialing. Someone else. "He's turning this into a circus," he muttered. "This wasn't supposed to be about emotions, this was about business, sponsors, partnerships." The voice on the other end was sharp. "Get control of it. Now." And somewhere in the crowd, someone else had been watching closely. Someone with more power than Aaron. Someone whose interest went far beyond the event itself. They smiled. Not out of kindness, but calculation. Because Sundar's heart-led moment had just triggered something bigger, something that had been waiting in the wings for years. And it was about to walk out from the shadows. The man in the gray suit, when Sundar returned to the stage, his mother now seated with quiet grace at its edge, and the young girl, Kirthi, still standing with the weight of 1,000 eyes on her. The room felt different. The air no longer buzzed with corporate polish or carefully curated formality. It carried something older, something softer, something real. People had come expecting a celebration of success, a well-lit ceremony of speeches and polished quotes, but what they were witnessing was something else entirely. The dismantling of everything artificial. Titles had faded, credentials no longer sparkled. It was as if the very walls of the venue had melted away, leaving behind only the raw truth of human connection. A mother, a son, a girl clinging to hope. And the countless people in the audience, each quietly carrying their own memories of being unseen, unheard, or underestimated. Sundar adjusted the microphone again. His voice was calm, but his eyes gave away the emotion bubbling just beneath the surface. "This world," he said, "was not built by geniuses. It was built by mothers who stayed up late sewing torn uniforms, by fathers who worked extra shifts so their children could study, by teachers who saw promise in shy boys and quiet girls, by people who didn't need recognition, only a chance." The applause came again, but this time slower, more reverent. It wasn't the type meant to impress or show agreement. It was the kind people give when they recognize a piece of their own life being spoken aloud. And yet, not everyone in the room felt that warmth. Far behind the rows of seats, near the technical control area, a man in a gray suit stood perfectly still. He was tall, clean-shaven, and wore a badge that identified him as part of the International Advisory Board. He had not clapped once. Not when Sundar honored his mother. Not when the girl spoke. Not when the crowd rose to its feet. His name was Vihan Shah. To the public, he was a philanthropist and a venture capitalist, a man who had appeared on magazine covers and spoken on global panels. But behind his controlled smile and impeccable suits, Vihan was something else, a strategist. The kind of man who measured moments not by emotion but by leverage. And right now, he saw a problem. For years, Vihan had carefully cultivated a narrative that success came from vision, execution, and discipline, not sentiment, not softness. His investments were clean, cold, and efficient. He didn't believe in feelings. Feelings were messy. They got in the way of deals, of partnerships, of power. And now, on the biggest stage of the year, the man he had reluctantly agreed to endorse, Sundar, was going off script. Vihan leaned toward the woman beside him, a communications executive from New York. "If he keeps going like this," he said under his breath, "he'll ruin the tone of the entire summit. He's turning a leadership event into a family reunion." "And yet the audience is still with him," she replied, eyes fixed on the stage. Vihan's jaw tightened. "Yes, for now." Meanwhile, on stage, Sundar continued. He wasn't reading from the teleprompter. He wasn't following notes. The voice that now echoed through the auditorium was unfiltered. The same voice he once used at engineering college debates, in long phone calls to friends, or when talking to young interns late at night in the office. He spoke about how his family never owned a car, how they waited 5 years for a landline telephone, how his first computer came not from a store but from a government program for engineering students. He described standing in line with his father to buy discounted notebooks during the school season, how the weight of those notebooks always felt heavier on the walk home. Not because of the paper, but because of the expectations packed inside them. And as he spoke, something strange began to happen. People started pulling out their phones, not to record, but to message loved ones. Someone texted their mother, another messaged their daughter. Someone sent a voice note to an old teacher. One man, seated near the front row, quietly wiped a tear and typed a message to his estranged brother. Outside the venue, the clip of Sundar honoring his mother had already begun to spread. First through India, then globally. Social media algorithms picked up the surge in views. Hashtags began forming, and within minutes a single image, Sundar holding his mother's hand near the barricade, became a symbol. But inside the hall, something else was about to unfold. Vihan took out his phone. He opened a secure app and typed a short message to his assistant. "Prepare Plan B, he's gone soft. This is our chance." Just then, a notification popped up on his screen. It was from one of the local media outlets. A live headline: CEO's tribute to mother brings summit to a halt, crowd in tears. Beneath it was another: unknown. Girl shares father's last words, audience stunned. Vihan's lips curled into a controlled smile, the kind that never reached his eyes. He slipped his phone back into his pocket and turned to leave the hall. But as he reached the rear exit, a man blocked his path. "Sir," the man said, dressed in a black security uniform. "You've been requested to remain inside." "By whom?" Vihan asked, his tone sharp. "Mr. Pichai." Vihan's expression didn't change, but a slight flicker passed through his eyes. "Interesting," he said, almost amused. "And what exactly does he want now?" "A private meeting," the guard said. After his speech, Vihan stepped back into the shadows, watching the stage from a distance. And as Sundar finished the last few lines of his talk, lines that weren't dramatic or rehearsed but spoken with deep, trembling sincerity, he looked once more at his mother, then at the girl, then at the crowd. "Some people believe power comes from titles," he said, "but I believe it comes from the ability to remember where you came from, and to carry others forward with you." The crowd stood again, this time with no hesitation. The applause filled the hall like thunder. But behind it all, in the silence of the back corner, Vihan Shah was already setting a trap. Because what Sundar didn't know yet was that the speech had triggered more than headlines. It had reawakened an old rivalry, one buried for years, And someone from his past, someone Sundar had nearly forgotten, was about to return. The letter that never arrived. The applause had faded, but its echo seemed to remain in the corners of the grand auditorium long after. The crowd began to thin. Event staff moved quietly along the aisles, resetting chairs and collecting empty water bottles. Soft jazz music played in the background to signal the closing of the evening. But the energy in the room hadn't settled. It had shifted. Something unspoken had been stirred, something that clung to people as they walked out into the warm Chennai night. They came expecting technology showcases, business forecasts, maybe a few well-crafted punchlines. Instead, they had been handed something raw, something human. Sundar sat quietly in the green room behind the stage, still wearing the same calm expression he had on stage, but his fingers trembled slightly as they rested against the wooden table beside him. In front of him sat a half-empty glass of water, a crumpled program schedule, and his mother, seated silently beside him, her eyes watching him the way she used to when he came home from school, with quiet pride and gentle concern. "You didn't eat anything," she said softly, reaching out to straighten the edge of his sleeve. "I will," he replied, his voice low, distant. "Just needed a moment." She didn't press. She knew this part of him well. The version that carried the weight of every word he'd just spoken, the pressure of every eye that had looked up at him. Even now he wasn't thinking about the headlines. He was thinking about that girl, Kirti, about her father's words, about all the quiet sacrifices made by people who would never stand on a stage. He was thinking about the security guards, about how they had turned his mother away, not with cruelty, but with a system designed to value passes more than people. Just then, his assistant stepped into the room. "Sir," he said hesitantly, "Vihan Shah is waiting. He asked for a private meeting." Sundar didn't look up. "Is he angry?" The assistant paused. He didn't look angry, but he looked ready. Sundar stood, smoothing his shirt. His mother reached for his arm just for a second. "Don't let him take your softness," she said. He nodded, understanding what she meant. "He already thinks it's weakness." "Then he's never known strength," she whispered. The hallway leading to the executive lounge was quiet. 2. Guards flanked the door. Inside, Vihan sat near the window, the city lights behind him casting long shadows across his sharp features. He didn't stand when Sundar entered. Instead, he gestured to the seat across from him. "Well," Vihan said, folding his hands neatly on the table. "That was touching." Sundar didn't sit. He remained standing, his back straight, eyes steady. "What do you want to say, Vihan?" Vihan smiled slightly, like a man about to reveal the final card in a poker game. "You went off script. You broke protocol. You shifted the tone of an international event without clearing it with the board. I wasn't here to impress a board. And yet the board signs the checks, funds the projects, protects the partnerships you rely on." Sundar finally sat. His voice was calm. "If the board can't handle the truth, then maybe they shouldn't be in charge of building the future." Vihan tilted his head, examining him. "Do you know how much money you cost us tonight? How much humanity would it have cost us to keep going as if nothing happened?" The room went quiet. Vihan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You think emotion is enough to lead people? It's not. You're building dreams. On feelings, Sundar. And feelings don't scale." Sundar looked directly at him now, unblinking. "Neither does fear. And yet it's the only thing you've ever tried to scale." Vihan didn't answer. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope, yellowed with age, the edges worn. He slid it across the table. "What is this?" Sundar asked, hesitant. "A letter," Vihan said simply. "From 17 years ago." Sundar stared at it. "Who sent it?" "Someone who believed in you more than anyone else ever did. Someone you forgot." Sundar opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a handwritten letter, its ink slightly faded but still legible. His eyes scanned the first lines and then his breath caught. It was from his former college professor, the one who had encouraged him to apply for a scholarship to study abroad. The man who had once told Sundar that leadership was not about command, it was about compassion. The man who had disappeared from his life after Sundar left India. The letter read, Sundar, I write this knowing you may never read it. I heard you got the offer. I'm proud beyond words. But don't let the West make you forget your roots. Don't let the suits and the glass towers take away your gentleness. Your kindness is your greatest asset. Hold on to it, no matter who laughs at it. Sundar felt something tighten in his chest. He flipped to the end of the letter, looking for the date. It was written just days before his flight to the United States. I never received this, he said, his voice hollow. You didn't, Vihan replied. Because I intercepted it. Sundar's head lifted slowly. Why? Because he was mine first, Vihan said, eyes cold now. He was my mentor. And when he chose you, when he believed in you, I saw something. I saw that if the world ever saw your heart, they'd forget mine. So I made sure they never would. The room was silent. The weight of betrayal years old still hung in the air like it had happened yesterday. He died 2 years ago, Vihan added, softer now, and I kept this letter hidden. But after tonight, something changed. Maybe I wanted to win. Maybe I wanted to break you. Or maybe, just maybe, I wanted to see if you'd still listen to a man who once believed in you. Sundar folded the letter slowly, placing it in his coat pocket. His hands were steady now. I didn't forget him, he said quietly. I just thought he gave up on me. He never did, Vihan said. But I did everything I could to make you think he had. Sundar stood. Then maybe this isn't about business anymore. No, Vihan replied, standing too. It never was. They stared at each other for a long moment, and then Vihan said something unexpected. She looked proud, he said, softly. Your mother, when you led her to that seat. It was the one moment tonight that made me feel something I didn't expect. Sundar nodded. Maybe that's a start. But as he left the room, the letter close to his chest, a message, arrived on Vihan's phone. He read it carefully, his face darkening. Someone else had found out about the letter. Someone neither of them had seen in years. Someone who was about to walk back into Sundar's life, carrying secrets far more dangerous than an old piece of paper. Shadows from the train platform. Chennai never sleeps the way quiet towns do. It hums, not loudly but constantly. Even late into the night, the streets murmur with the sound of auto rickshaws, the scent of fried lentils drifting through alleyways, the low whistle of distant trains cutting across the city's heartbeat. On one such platform, far from the well-lit summit hall, a man stood silently under a flickering tube light. His face was hardened by the years, jaw clenched not in anger, but in resolve. A worn satchel hung from his shoulder. The straps were torn at the edges. Inside it was a folder marked in faded ink. Batch 1993. It Madras. His name was Devraj. He had once been Sundar's roommate. More than that, he had been his brother in struggle. They had shared meals, dreams, laughter. They had split the cost of second-hand textbooks and borrowed each other's exam notes. They studied by candlelight when the electricity failed. They whispered their plans for the future under the covers when the rest of the dorm was asleep. But somewhere along the way, life had changed. Sundar had flown. Devraj had stayed. Not by choice. As the train screeched to a halt behind him and passengers poured out onto the cracked platform tiles, Devraj remained still. In his hand was a printed photo, grainy, taken from the live feed of the summit. It showed Sundar standing beside his mother, the young girl in uniform just behind them. Devraj's eyes lingered on Sundar's expression. It was not pride. It was not power. It was something else. Something softer. Something familiar. And it unsettled him. He had not planned to return. Not after what happened all those years ago. But when the news of Sundar's speech spread and the image went viral, someone sent him a message, no name, just 3 words. He remembered you. Devraj knew immediately who it came from. Professor Nambiar's widow. The professor who had once mentored both boys. The same professor whose letter had been hidden by Vihan for nearly 2 decades. What? No one knew, not even Sundar, was that Devraj had once been offered the same opportunity. The same scholarship. The same chance to leave India and study abroad. But one mistake had taken it away, and it had something to do with Sundar. Back in 1997, both boys had applied for the prestigious fellowship. It was a rare chance for students from modest backgrounds to pursue graduate studies in the United States. Professor Nambiar had recommended them both, with passion, with belief. And both had made it to the final round. But only one letter of recommendation had reached the committee. Only one boy had boarded that plane. Devraj hadn't spoken to Sundar since. He had assumed the worst, that his friend had taken the spotlight and left him behind. That perhaps Sundar had said something to sway the final decision. Over the years, bitterness had hardened into silence. But now, after all this time, with the professor's letter exposed and the truth of Vihayan's manipulation beginning to surface, questions bubbled back to the top. He tightened his grip on the folder. Tonight he would face Sundar. Not with blame, not with envy, but with the one thing neither of them had shared in decades, the full truth. Meanwhile, back at the summit venue, Sundar sat alone in the conference hall, the lights dimmed, his mother having returned to the hotel to rest. The echoes of the day still danced in his mind, the young girl's words, the crowd's reaction, the way Vihan had spoken about the letter as if it were a chess piece rather than a message of love. He unfolded the letter once more, reading it line by line. His professor's handwriting was gentle, looping, almost careful, as though the words themselves were afraid to hurt the page. You do not owe the world success, Sundar. You owe it remembrance. Of the boy you were, of the people who helped. You rise, and the ones who never got the same chance. He closed his eyes. That last line haunted him. He had tried to live honorably. He had tried to give back, but something about that sentence made him feel as if he had forgotten someone important. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. His assistant stepped in, looking confused. Sir, someone is here to see you. Now? Sundar asked. Yes, he says it's urgent. Who? The assistant hesitated. Devraj, from Ayat. The name fell like a stone into Sundar's chest. He stood immediately, his heartbeat quickening. Where is he? In the side hall. He said he didn't want to disturb the main floor. Sundar walked briskly down the hall. The moment he turned the corner and saw him, the same frame, a little older, a little thinner, the same deep eyes. Something inside him dropped, not from fear, but from guilt. Devraj, he said, stopping a few feet away. You remember? Devraj replied, voice low. How could I forget? There was silence between them, stretched taut like a thread that had never quite broken. You never called, Devraj said. Never wrote. I thought you were angry. I was. Then why are you here now? Devraj opened the satchel and pulled out the folder. He laid it on the table between them. Because we both deserve the truth. And the truth is, I didn't lose that scholarship because of you. I lost it because someone else made sure I did. Sundar looked confused. What are you talking about? Vihan. He blocked my second letter, the one confirming my acceptance. He told them I had a disciplinary mark, a lie. He erased me, because Professor Nambiar told him I was a risk. He said I had too much fire, too much edge. Sundar sat down, stunned. But why? Why would he care? Because he needed to clear the path for someone else, Devraj said quietly. For you? I didn't know, Sundar whispered. I know, Devraj replied. That's why I'm here. He pulled out a second document, older, typed, official looking. This is a copy of the original recommendation letter. Professor Nambiar wrote one for each of us. He believed in both of us. He said we were two halves of the same future. Sundar took it in his hands. He read the opening line and felt the sting of tears behind his eyes. Devraj is the question, and Sundar is the answer. But the world needs both. For years, Sundar had believed his journey was a lone ascent. Now he realized it had been built on invisible threads, on friendships sacrificed, on truths buried, on mentors silenced. He stood, walked to the window. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, voice trembling. Devraj looked at him with something deeper than anger, something closer to hope. "Don't change the past. Just don't let it happen again." But before Sundar could respond, a loud chime echoed from his assistant's phone. The news alert was flashing across every screen in the city. Breaking. Summit documents leaked. Funding mismanagement, internal conflicts exposed. Anonymous source claims corruption tied to top sponsors. Sundar and Devraj looked at each other. They both knew. This wasn't over. Someone was trying to burn everything down. And they had just lit the first match. The truth they tried to bury, the city of Chennai felt heavier the next morning. Not from the heat, though the sun rose over the skyline with its usual fierce light. The heaviness came from the weight of questions now hanging in the air. Questions printed in bold across newspapers. Questions whispered in the corridors of corporations. And questions that sat unspoken on breakfast tables in homes across the country. A leak had shattered the polished surface of the summit, pulling open doors long kept shut. The documents revealed more than just numbers. They exposed relationships between certain sponsors and public officials, secret donations to preferred institutions, and the quiet silencing of voices that didn't follow the script. Most shocking of all, buried deep in a scanned email thread was a single name, Vihan Shah. His signature appeared on memos detailing the suppression of candidates for scholarships, dating back nearly 2 decades. One of those memos specifically mentioned 2 students from Madras. It was cold, methodical, and real. When Sundar read it, he didn't feel triumphant. He felt sick. He sat alone in the rooftop garden of the hotel that morning, overlooking the city he still considered home. Birds wheeled above in circles. The street below bustled with morning routines. And inside his chest, the storm brewed silently. He held the letter from Professor Nambiar in one hand and the newly leaked memo in the other. 2 pages, 2 decades apart. One filled with hope, the other with betrayal. He had known the truth was dangerous, but he hadn't realized just how many people had built their power by controlling who received opportunity and who didn't. His mother joined him quietly, a small steel cup of chai in her hand. She didn't say anything. She simply sat, looking out at the morning sky. "Amma," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I thought all I had to do was work hard. Study. Be honest. I thought that would be enough." She looked at him with the same soft eyes she always had. It was. But when you shine, some people will try to stand in your light. He turned to her, eyes clouded. "So what do I do now?" "You don't dim yourself," she said. "You use the light to show what they've hidden." By noon, the media storm had grown. Journalists gathered outside the summit venue. Questions flew from every direction. Vihan had not yet responded. His office had gone silent. And within corporate circles, messages began flying. Who leaked the files? Is Sundar involved? Will he speak publicly? Inside the auditorium, a press conference had already been scheduled for closing remarks. It was meant to be a polished summary of the summit's success, a well-rehearsed goodbye before the cameras turned away. But when Sundar walked onto the stage, the room fell into a different kind of silence. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore a simple white shirt and gray slacks, sleeves rolled up. No podium, no script, just him. "Before I say anything else," he began, "I want to say something to someone who isn't here." He pulled the letter from his pocket, unfolded it gently, and placed it on the table beside him. To Professor Nambiar, whose voice was stolen. whose belief in his students was buried beneath bureaucracy. I never got to thank you, but I hear you now. He looked up at the crowd. This summit was never supposed to be about me, or about any one person. It was about what's possible when we lift each other. But for that to happen, we have to tell the truth, even when it costs us, even when it shakes the walls we built our reputations on. He paused, letting the words breathe. Yes, there was corruption. Yes, some opportunities were stolen. And yes, I benefited from systems that silenced others, even if I didn't know it then. The air in the room changed. A confession, not out of guilt but courage. I am not ashamed of my success, but I am ashamed that my brother Devraj was forced to carry silence for so long. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure others don't suffer the same erasure. At that moment, Devraj stepped into view. Sundar gestured for him to join him on stage. The cameras clicked rapidly. The story had already begun writing itself. This man, Sundar continued, should have been on that flight with me. He should have stood on this stage years ago. Today he does. They shook hands, then embraced, not as symbols but as friends who had finally found their way back through years of silence, wounds, and misunderstanding. And to the girl who spoke last night, Sundar added, voice softening, your father was right. Not because of what I've done, but because of what you carry. His words, his faith, they live in you, and I promise the future will make room for voices like yours. Outside, the crowd erupted in cheers. Not choreographed, not polite, but raw, messy, emotional. People clapped not for a man but for a mirror held up to their own struggles, for the friend who was left behind, the mother who was turned away, the teacher whose letters never reached their destination. And somewhere in the background, Fihan watched it all unfold on a muted television screen. He didn't speak. He didn't curse. He simply stared. He had built his empire on control, but control had limits. And tonight, it had failed. The sun set slowly over Chennai that evening, casting long orange streaks across rooftops and power lines. Sundar sat again with his mother, this time in their childhood home. A modest flat with cracked tiles, peeling paint, and the warmth that only memory can give. She poured tea into 2 cups. How does it feel? She asked. Like I finally told the truth, he said. The truth is enough, she replied. It always was. He looked around the room. The same fan spinning overhead, the same old bookshelf with his school medals. Everything looked smaller now, but not less important. In fact, it felt more sacred than ever, because this was the place where the journey began. And it was here, not in the boardrooms or on the stages, that he finally understood the full meaning of success, not as something you earn alone, but something you share, something you protect, and something you return to, even after the world tells you to forget.